Hey, it's Ed. As we get started with 2021, I'd like to thank everyone who's supported the podcast over the past few years. I've never paid for advertising, so the reason that the podcast has been successful is because of people like you sharing it with your friends, leaving positive reviews on Apple Podcast, and sharing it on social media. It's really blown my mind how powerful word-of-mouth recommendations can be, so thank you all very, very much. I've also got a long list of folks who have generously supported the podcast financially, and you can check out that full list of their names at mountainandprairie.com/support. And one of the methods for financial support is through Patreon, which is a monthly option. Depending on your level of support, there are lots of different benefits, including Mountain and Prairie stickers, a discount code for the Mountain and Prairie online store, and a monthly behind-the-scenes newsletter from me, which includes book, podcast, and film recommendations, as well as other useful information. I've also been doing live video chats with some of my past podcast guests, and in 2021, I'll be recording these conversations and posting them on Patreon for certain support levels to view at your convenience. There's currently one video chat posted with rancher and entrepreneur Jim Howell, with more to come soon. The support levels start at as little as $2 a month, and I greatly appreciate everyone who has signed up over the past few years. But again, no pressure to support via Patreon. The podcast is free and always will be free. But if you want to go a little deeper and access additional content, I'd love to have you join the Patreon crew. Go to mountainandprairie.com/support to check out all the options. Hey, this is Ed Roberson, and this is the Mountain and Prairie podcast, where I introduce you to some of the innovative individuals who are shaping the future of the American West. I meet most of these people through my work in land conservation or through my hobbies and interests that revolve around spending time up high in the mountains. My guests include ranchers, writers, entrepreneurs, conservationists, athletes, artists, adventurers, pretty much anyone who's doing important work, has an interesting story, and loves the American West. My guest today is Chris Douglas. Chris is a Montana-based photographer and creative director who's one of the most sought-after visual storytellers in the American West. Chris is a go-to photographer for iconic brands such as Filson, Stetson, and Mossy Oak, and his editorial work appears regularly in publications including Modern Huntsman and Men's Journal. In a world flooded with iPhone photography and armchair creatives, Chris's work stands out as being artistically stunning and of the highest professional caliber. When viewing Chris's work, most people would assume that he's been laser-focused on photography for his entire career. But even though his interest in photography began at age 10, the first half of his career was spent in front of the lens, first as an international model for brands such as Versace, and then as a successful television actor. But life moving between LA, New York, and Milan was not a fit with his love of the outdoors, so Chris eventually moved to Montana, where he continued his lifelong passion for hunting and adventure. Then, as you'll hear him describe, Chris was severely injured in a horse accident, which became the catalyst that led him to leave acting behind and devote his full energies to photography. Those of you who are longtime listeners know that I spend a lot of time preparing for each of these interviews, but as you'll hear, I was completely surprised by much of Chris's story. Chris is unbelievably humble and keeps a low profile, so I was honored that he was open to sharing his full journey with me on the podcast. We started out chatting about his upbringing in East Tennessee and his tight-knit, supportive family that he credits with being the foundation for all of his success. Then we discuss his fascinating career trajectory, from international model to soap opera star to television host, then to photographer. We had a great conversation about his Native American ancestry and how Native American culture has influenced his work and his family's life in Montana. Chris's story is both entertaining and instructive. He's a wonderful example of how life's unexpected twists and turns can lead people on the most interesting journeys, and how hard work, humility, creativity, and professionalism can result in a one-of-a-kind life and career. Check out the extensive episode notes for everything we discuss. Hope you enjoy. Thinking about your background and how diverse it is and how many different cool things you've done, I thought maybe the best way to start it is just start at the very beginning. And maybe if you could talk about where you grew up, because it's not out west like we are right now, but where did you grow up and when did, what was your childhood like?
I grew up in East Tennessee in a town called Clinton. And it's kind of, I don't know. Every time I describe it to somebody, they're like, "Oh, what an idyllic little way to grow up." But I mean, Clinton's a town situated just outside of Knoxville that's on the Clinch River there and Melton Hill Lake. And it's just, it was a great place to grow up. I mean, I feel very blessed to have the parents that I had, and then also have the community and the family around me that I had there. I mean, I think it shaped me, in whatever degree to do, to where I am now. I mean, I feel I still have those roots, and I still feel that connection to Tennessee. It's just, as you get older and you have these dreams and these aspirations and things like that, I kind of found myself moving toward living out here in Montana where I live now. But just, I kind of knew in the back of my mind that it was going to be something along the sorts of what I'm doing now. I just couldn't put my finger on it at the time. Like if you'd asked me when I was 11, if I ever thought I'd be living in Montana or doing what I'm doing now, no, not by any means. But
that's funny, because that was one of the questions I had on my list. No joke. Could you have ever guessed that you would end up doing this? So two questions about Tennessee. One, I read that you started taking photos when you were 10 years old. So how did photography enter your life? And then when did you start getting this seed planted about the West? I mean, was that through reading or movies or talking about it with your family? How did all that kind of come together?
Well, my mom had an old Canon. I think it was like an AE1 or something like that. And we're talking back, 1979, 1980, I'm dating myself here, but it was back when they were shooting film. And I remember she'd fuss at me because it'd be like, "You're shooting all this film," and I go get these pictures and they're the same pictures. And I've got one of the pictures. She sent it to me the other day. She was laughing, but it's over my bed. I had this University of Tennessee football, like painting of a football helmet with a jersey, and, I had the backdrop. And so I can't tell you how it got inside me to, here, I'm going to take my mom's camera and start taking pictures. So I set up a orange blanket background and put my football helmet there and my jersey, set up this whole scenario as best as I could with the resources that I had to set it up. And I took the pictures, and she said, "Here's one pictures." But she said we had like 36 of the same picture because I was trying to get how I could frame it. But, that was kind of my first induction into being able to, learn how to work a camera. I mean, I think at the camera shop, I remember my mom telling me, they said, "Just keep everything at 5.6 and, everything should be fine, and use 400 film inside and 100 film outside." And that's about the gist of it. So I kind of was making my way through it, like I said, for what resources that I had. And then that kind of progressed its way into duck hunt, going to the family outings with, taking pictures of us hunting. Yep. I'm an only child, but I have a big family. I've got my aunts. My mom's sister had 4 boys that were all older than me, so I got my share of being hazed and locked in closets and all that kind of funny stuff.
Oh, yeah, character building.
Yeah. But they all were adamant about duck hunting and hunting and all that kind of good stuff. And so that's how I kind of got indoctrinated into that. My dad would go with us, but he's more of a car and motorcycle guy. So I loved taking pictures of all the labs that my cousins had, and the working dogs and the ducks and just the area around there. We did a lot of hunting on Dale Hollow Lake and in between Nashville and Knoxville, and then that kind of progressed its way all the way through into high school and college. And then same thing, hunting with buddies and stuff like that. So, but as far as for like how it initially took hold, I don't know. I think it was just one of those things that I was supposed to do, but don't know why. I try not to question things like that too much, because then I'll explode my brain trying to figure it out. But
no, I know the feeling.
So it just kind of happenstance, but I think, whatever you want to call a higher calling or whatever at that point in time in my life. I mean, I feel like it circled its way back in some form or fashion.
And was it always photography, or were you artistic in other ways? I mean, was there other artistic outlets, music or drawing or anything like that? Or was photography pretty much your focus?
Yeah, I always drew. I mean, I see a lot of my son who's 11. I see a lot of myself in him. I mean, he draws and is into music and that kind of stuff. I myself don't play an instrument well by any means, but I always drew. So, I mean, I think, and my mom's very creative in that respect, and my dad is as well in his own right, but they never, like, I think my mom, you know, she was good at, like, if a store needed retail parts done or something like that, she could go in and she could just visually see those type of things. So I probably got a lot from both of my parents, but probably more so my mom in that regard, from the creative aspects of it. And then also, you know, allowing me to use her camera and that kind of stuff. Like, it just little things that kind of piece themselves together, I guess.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so on your website, on your bio, it mentions that when you were in college, somehow your work caught the attention of Bruce Weber, a famous photographer, and that kind of started your journey as a real pro in the photography business. And I looked up Bruce Weber because, I mean, I'm not deep in the photography world, and I instantly recognized his work, because you think about, like, you know, the 90s or late 80s and some of this, like Abercrombie and Fitch and all the kind of the pop culture that I think of when I think of those days. And I mean, he was right there in the center of it, from what I understand from my unscientific Google search. So, I mean, how did your work end up in front of a guy like that, first of all? And then how did that go when you took off from Tennessee to go to New York?
Well, it wasn't the photography. It was, so I was in front of the camera when I was working with Bruce. So Bruce had this, he always hired athletes. I'll kind of have to walk this backwards a little bit.
Yeah.
So I was going to University of Tennessee. I wanted to play all I wanted to do was play football. So unfortunately, at the time, coming out of a single A private school in Knoxville, it just, you know, wasn't in the cards for me, whatever, for size or whatever else. So I wanted to go walk on and ended up going to University of Tennessee. And some scouts he had modeling scouts that would go around at that time. You know, that you're talking 1988, 89. Okay. So we had modeling scouts that would go around to different colleges. So I remember being on, you know, having people come up and say, "Hey, do you want to do this?" And I was like, "What's it for?" And they're like, "It's modeling, and it's for a company called, you know, Versace or whatever." And I'm like, "No," you know, they're like, "Well, this is how much it pays." And I'm like, "Oh, where do I go?" So, because back then it paid, like, but things were a lot different. So, and I remember being on the shoot, and it was like the middle linebacker for University of Miami, and then there was another outside linebacker from the University of Oregon, and then there was a Olympic wrestler and some water polo players. And so he had a real knack for finding real people who do real things and kind of not turning them into models, but allowing them to be able to, you know, he could shoot people in a way that he saw that was totally different than just the next person.
Yeah.
So he got a real idea for, you know, laser focused idea of what he wanted for those brands and the branding for those companies. And so, like I say, it's just kind of there again, it was happenstance that I fell into that and started working in the industry in that regard. And so this was before cell phones and all that stuff. So I would always, like, look at the setups and what he was shooting. And I never mentioned that I was interested in taking pictures, used to take pictures, took pictures, anything like that. It was more or less just trying to immerse myself into that world and being able to work with people like Bruce Weber or Stephen Meisel or Arthur Elgort or all these great photographers that, you know, I'm taking mental notes in my head, like I said, just every time that I'm working with them, just to figure out, like, how they're doing this. Like, oh, he's using just a soft box light, and where what the angles were and how to play the lighting and stuff like that. So, you know, you figure at that point in time, I'm 19 years old, 20, kind of, and living between, I'm jumping forward here, but living between New York and Paris and Milan for a good 2.5 years. It was just it was a real education for me in that regard.
Yeah.
Not to the fashion industry, but also to getting out of Tennessee and seeing what the whole, you know, everything's about. Like, it really grow up, I guess. So
that's so you were a full-time model. I mean, that was your job for several years all over the world.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, not by choice, but by happenstance. Like I say, that's kind of the way the pieces of the puzzle in my life kind of fit together. And sometimes I have a hard time talking about it just because I don't want to make it sound woo-woo or lose the magic of it. But yeah, I just kind of ended up there and headed down that road.
That's super interesting. And I think what I think is so cool about that is, you were on this career path there, or had this opportunity in front of you that a lot of people would think is kind of the end all. Like, oh man, this is a good deal. I get paid for this. I get to travel. And yet you kind of were still focused on the artistic side of it that had kind of embedded itself in your brain 10 years before, 12 years before. How did those photographers, the ones that were behind the lens, how did they react when you would, ask them questions? Or, I mean, were they pretty open to sharing information over the years? I mean, how did they react when you showed some interest in what they were doing versus what you were doing?
I didn't really ask a lot of questions.
Just observing.
If I didn't want to impede on what they were doing, or, some of the ones that I mentioned, along with there's Bob Frame. I mean, there was Norman Seeff, who I thought that he was the coolest, because here's this band that I like named Kiss that he shot the 1975 Hotter Than Hell cover for. And he had those big blown up in his studio. And I was just like, wow, that's cool. Those type of things. And I just didn't ask questions, because I knew the ins and outs of from being in college and taking some pictures to where it was like I was actually starting to work in the dark room and work with images and figure out, thank goodness for digital now, because that's very time consuming. There's an art to that all by itself. But when you're actually, developing and printing your own work. So there were little bits of that, but I didn't, I would pick up things here and there from assistants, like where there's Bruce's assistants or this one's assistants. And like Bruce used a lab called Lexington Labs in New York that stylistically, he told them what he wanted, and they helped build that look and for Calvin Klein and Ralph Lauren and Versace and all these different companies. And so it was interesting for me to see how the back end worked, from that perspective. Yeah. And to have somebody as successful as somebody like Bruce, who, is an icon in his own right in that regard, or like Stephen Meisel, or that caliber of, Skrybneski, that caliber of photographer. Like they're just, it's kind of awe-inspiring, but it was just like kind of the right place at the right time, because I don't know that with the way things are today that they're necessarily the same.
Yeah.
With social media and everything else. And it's so cliche to say everybody's a photographer, everybody that has a cell phone or this or that. Well, yeah, because you can be, because the quality of images that are coming out of an iPhone or anything now match, what we were shooting back then. But it's interesting to see, you're getting a lot of different people of that caliber now. It's a little bit overwhelming to me, though, under some circumstances, in the sense that there are so many talented people out there to choose from, to work with.
Oh yeah. Well, and one thing I want to talk to you about, once we get through this is just the business approach. Cause I feel like it's very clear with your work that there's the artistic side, and then there's the straight up business side. And I want to learn more about how you balance that. But before we get to that, how did you end up transitioning out of your time in New York and Milan and LA? How did you end up transitioning from that? Was Montana soon thereafter?
Well, doing the amount of traveling that I was doing for that, those few years, and how that fit into the roots of what I was talking about. Like, I feel like with the roots of my family and the impact that they had on me and still have on me, as far as for being able to keep me grounded, I guess is the best way to put it. I continued, even when I was doing those things, to still meet up with my mom's brother and go elk hunting in Colorado or do things like that. So it was one of those things to where they kept me grounded and kept perspective for me for what I wanted to do. And I tried to never get live in New York now, or I live in LA, or I live in Milan, or I live in Paris, or anything like that. I was kind of probably in my mind's eye right now going through the motions. I was more like a robot, and just XYZ, 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 just to where it was just a continuum of this is not the end all be all. This is this is just a part of whatever journey that I'm on right now, and we'll see where it takes me next. So with that said, oddly enough, without pursuing it, and like I said, I don't want to take anything away from the people that did pursue it, but like I ended up on a TV show on a soap opera called One Life to Live when I was in New York, and I was living in LA at the time, and my agents had wanted me to go read for something, and this was an ABC deal. And so I ended up reading for it, and I didn't think anything about it. And I think it was like 4 or 5 months later that it was like they got a call and they're like, oh yeah, we want to hire him. And I'm like, no, I'm not moving back to New York right now. I don't really want to be in New York right now. Lo and behold, contractually and everything else, I ended up having to fulfill that. And a lot of the times when I'm kicking and screaming and fussing and cussing, and there's usually something to learn in it for me. I've kind of figured that out. Yeah. So years of making the same mistake.
Sure.
Numerous times. But I ended up in New York again on a soap opera for, called One Life to Live. And I did that, ended up like for 2.5 year contract or something like that. But what was nice is that during that time, and not having to be in the city every single day, I was able to afford myself a place to stay in just outside of Connecticut, like right on the Connecticut-New York line. Mm-hmm. I lived in a little town called North Salem, New York. And then I was like, oh, this is awesome because it was a bow-only county and I could bow hunt.
Nice.
So, they thought I was crazy because I'm in the dressing room at 66, in Central Park West and Amsterdam, in between the two of them. And I'm like sharpening broadheads and stuff like that in between work. So they were just like, he's a little off, so it was that was my life. That was allowing me to do the things that I wanted to do at that point in time. It was interesting because of the fact that like where I was in New York, like the history and everything else was just amazing. But like I say, you're a little over an hour from New York City. And, I found some buddies up there to go hunt with, and I was, I'm a traditional bow hunter, and they all kind of walked me through like how to make my own arrows and how to do all these things. So it was a real learning process even from an outdoor perspective, even though I was working in New York City. So it was kind of an anomaly, but it was a good one.
That's really cool. And I didn't have any idea about this. And I dug around on the internet. I spend a good bit of time preparing for these things because I don't want to sound like a dumbass. And I didn't know any of this stuff. It's so cool. So New York, you were there for 2.5 years. If you had to think about, looking back at that experience, being on a TV show, living this life that you probably wouldn't have expected on one side, and then the other side doing all this cool outdoor stuff that was right in line. What was knowing what you know now and how, your career was built on that experience then, what was the best part of that experience and the worst part of that experience?
I would say the best part was, here I'm in my mid-20s at this point, and somewhat the solidification of like trying to become a man or do things for myself and trying to find my own way, I guess. So, that being in New York kind of allowed me the opportunity. I was making good money, so it was, but at that age, I'm thinking like, what does this really do for me? So it allowed me money's no more than just allowing you the freedom to do the things that you want to do or do for others. So that's where it kind of allowed me the opportunity to be able to have that freedom to be able to travel and do the things that I wanted to do. Like, I was gone every weekend, whether it was for work, doing stuff for the show or the network, or whether I was in Maine bear hunting or I was in Colorado hunting or I was, I tried to immerse myself. Like I said, it was like trying to put two magnets together because you've got this city work environment and then and then I would just bail on all of it and be gone. So I think that was good for me in the sense of it really shown me the path that I wanted to go down. Like I said, it was just allowing me to get from that next piece of the puzzle. So I don't know. I hadn't thought about this in a long time, so I'm trying to figure out how to put it into words. But
no, it makes sense. And have you always been, ever since you were a kid, were you the kind that pretty confident to do your own thing? Because I just would imagine that you're in that world in New York. It's to a lot of people, that is the end all. And I would think it could be very easy to get caught up in that. Even if you were a pretty committed outdoorsman as a kid or teenager. You know, I know a lot of people who not in the entertainment business, but like in the investment banking business, and they get up there and they just get sucked in and they forget about that side of themselves. And maybe they want to, I don't know. But I mean, it seems like that would take a pretty independent streak to be so deeply immersed in a kind of an all-consuming life on one side and then still have the focus or the confidence or whatever to be like, yeah, that's cool, but I'm going to do this other thing that I also think is cool.
Well, like I say, I think it was the influence of my family and where I grew up that rooted me in, you know, the outdoors and because, we were only 45 minutes from Smoky Mountains National Park. And so I find it like, you know, jumping ahead to where I am now, I'm about equidistant to Yellowstone National Park. So, I mean, this is very similar in the sense, you know, from the environment. It just, you know, Montana, I think, and the reason that I ended up here, and it allowed me to do more things here that I wanted to do. And kind of like, you know, at one point in time, I was saying I should have been born back, you know, in the 1800s. I probably would have fit in a lot better. But
that comes up. People say that on this podcast a lot, actually. I've heard that a lot.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's something that people, I don't know. I have more of an affinity for like not lots of people. I mean, I can deal with it and I appreciate cities and I appreciate everything the city has to offer. And I don't knock people that want to live in the city, but like, for me personally, I just prefer a simpler, quieter life, I guess.
Yeah.
I'm getting back to what you were talking about during that time. I think that's when I kind of acknowledged the fact that we'd taken a trip to my mom and my grandmother and my dad and I had taken a trip out west and ended up going to, I think this was before I was doing the gig there in New York, the soap opera. And we came out to Jackson Hole and went through Jackson Hole and all the way up through southwest Montana and around that way. And I felt really grounded when I got here.
Yep.
So from a sense of like a belonging. So I think that's when that seed got planted for me to make my way as fast and as furious as I could to Montana. And so to answer your question, I ended up out here once the contract with ABC was complete. I ended up moving out here I got a place in McAllister, Montana, which is over near Ennis, and then ended up getting a place because it was a little bit far away at that point in time from town or things that I needed to do or an airport. So ended up moving closer to Bozeman, over to an area called Trail Creek. And then subsequently ended up where we are now. But that's all where it started right there, I think, just from that trip. So,
man, that is like generally when I had these conversations, I kind of know where they're going to go, and I have a good idea, and all that was completely new to me. So cool. I mean, I think that is so interesting on so many different levels. And so you arrive in Montana. Which, by the way, I love that area down by Ennis, man. That was kind of my first taste of Montana. And so what did you do? Like you get here, I imagine maybe you still have some jobs in front of the lens, but when do you start kind of committing yourself towards professional photography?
Not for a while. I mean, I always took pictures, but I didn't ever want to hang that shingle out. I mean, you remember I'm coming off of a soap opera. It's not that a lot of people knew who I was or anything like that. It's not in that respect. It was more so like I didn't want to be that guy. I didn't want to be the actor turned or model turned actor turns, photographer. I just didn't. It just wasn't in the cards at that point in time in my life, and I was just kind of separating myself from all of that. Because that's not, I don't feel like my job or the job that I was doing at the time, because like I said, I don't really consider myself an actor or a model, or I'm not a label kind of person, but like those were the jobs that I had that carried me forward to get to certain points. And I just wanted to separate myself from those long enough to get, a real sense of who I was, or who I am still, that thinking back on it, like I say, it's kind of swirling around in my head, all the different thoughts that I'm thinking right now, just because I don't talk about it a lot, but trying to figure out how everything moved forward from there. I don't know. I try not to think about it too much because I don't want to take away from what that was, but it just, I don't know, it just happened. And I started just trying to find a way to where, like, there again, immersing myself in something, be it Montana at that point in time, and finding things to do and people to meet. And I was pretty much a loner. I had friends and knew people, but I was outside most of the time. I was hunting or fishing or doing things of that nature. So it wasn't, I'd got some horses before moving here full time and had those here, and they were already here because I bought them here in Montana. Yeah, from the place that I moved after I left McAllister, I could get on my horse and ride for days.
Nice.
So it's kind of nice. So, that's, like I say, I spent a lot of time alone, but I was still, during hunting season, that's what I was doing. Like I said, just immersing myself in figuring out where every little nook and cranny was, from a couple of hour ride from the house to living life.
Yeah. Going full speed, man.
Luckily at that point I had some money saved, so it wasn't like I was like having to beat the bushes or go find something to do here per se. But like I said, that job allowed me the freedom to be able to do what I wanted to do at that point in time. And so further down the line, I got a call to do another show. And so I was like, there again, I was reticent to do that one as well. So my manager in LA at the time, Larry Shapiro, is a good guy, still a great friend of mine. Him knowing how I was in the industry, like I always considered him like my bulldozer. Like I get a little BS on my feet, but I wouldn't be neck deep in it like some people find themselves in it in LA. Uh-huh. So he called and said, "Hey, I called up some people and they want you to come work on this other show." And I was like, "Oh God!" Like, okay. So I ended up it was for a show called Young and the Restless, and so I went and did a contract role there. And I was supposed to be there. I think I had a 3-year contract, and I was there all of about 7 months because I didn't fit the executive producer and the writer at the time. I think I was the first person that they'd ever hired that didn't have the approval of both or meeting both of them. And before they hired me, and here I am coming out of Montana, and at this point in time, I'd been working some ranches and rodeoing and doing some different things that I picked up along the way here, and ended up back on a show, and they were wanting me to like have a nose ring and have like blonde streaks in my hair. And I was like, absolutely not. Like, no, I'm not. So I put the fake nose ring in for a little while, and then they put this stuff called hair mascara in my hair and tried to make it look blonde. And I was like, oh, I can't wait to see what my buddies say about this. But anyway, ended up there. And then the day I got fired from there because of the internal conflict amongst, the people that were in charge, NBC hired me for a show called Passions. It was on for a little while, and it was different. So I was on Passions for about 2 years, and then ended up just stopping everything again. So I had to get back home, and came back home and started working my way through back to what I was doing before, more of the horse stuff, the rodeo stuff, any of that kind of things that were keeping me busy and keeping my mind occupied. And then ended up getting asked to do, so during that time I'd met, we ended up becoming friends. His name's Scott Gurney. So they owned a company called Gurney Productions, which did all of and he's from Louisiana. I think he went to Rutgers or something, but him being from Louisiana, me being from Tennessee, in LA and places like that, in New York, you kind of gravitate towards, like-minded. Yeah. He hunts and all that kind of stuff. And so he and his wife ended up producing Duck Dynasty. And so they had a deal. They did all the Shark Week shows, and they had a deal with Discovery Channel, and they'd been asking me to host a show for them. And I was like, I'm not really, no, thank you. I was like, why don't you host it? Because you're good at it. And he's like, no, you host it. And so finally, after a few months of coaxing, they call on a Friday and go, we got a ticket for you and your wife to come and flying out. We're flying out and we're doing these shows. And so it was called Feeding Frenzy. So I did 3 shows for Discovery Channel where I hosted these shows, and they would put me in this box that another buddy of mine that worked with Scott named Bobby Pura made. And it was essentially like a bulletproof glass box. And then they would set me in different areas, and then we would run quote unquote tests on the animals that were there. So we did we did grizzly bears and black bears in Alaska, and then we did gators and crocs in Florida. We were supposed to do them in South Africa or somewhere, but for whatever time of the year it was, they were dormant.
Yeah.
And we did lions in Africa. So that was interesting. I mean, that was more online with what, getting outside and being in the outdoors and being around animals as much as I had. I mean, it was a good experience. So hosted those shows, and then ended up coming home right after that. And we had a sick horse. We'd been out roping one evening and came home, and it was one of those days that the barometric pressure, dropped dramatically and then went back up, and which can sometimes cause horses to colic. And we had a horse that was colicking, and run him in the round pen, and he was facing me, and I didn't think that he had it in him to do anything because he kept trying to lay down because they'll want to lay down. And I'd sent my wife to the neighbors to get Vanamine to loosen him up. And he turned around like an NFR bucking horse. And I got one, and I didn't see it coming, but I got one foot in the bottom jaw on one foot in the back of the head. And it threw me about 2.5 feet. And I think I knocked out like 8 teeth.
Oh, man.
And broke my jaw pretty severely enough to where it was like hanging down. And so my buddy was there, and he ran in and grabbed it must have been frozen blueberries or something, in a towel. And then my wife was coming back from the neighbors about that same time, and we got to the emergency room. And my other buddy that was there with us, his wife works in the ER, luckily. And he called and said, "Hey, Chris, you might want to call a helicopter." So anyway, I got to do a helicopter ride. And so I walked around for about 2 years, year and a half really, without any teeth, because I had so many surgeries. They were having to replace the bone and underneath my nose, like in that part where that holds your teeth in, and then replace bone along my jawline. Yeah, so that was an experience. And so that kind of and I only tell you that because that kind of shut everything off from that perspective of like Discovery Channel, ABC, NBC, CBS, all those things.
Yeah.
Not having teeth for a while, it prevents you from being in front of the camera. So that's when I really decided, hey, I'm gonna pick the camera back up, and I feel like now's a good time to start doing some things. And so my wife and we started a marketing company we were producing rodeos and team ropings and stuff like that at that point in time, and I had been doing all of our own marketing, and subsequently some of the companies that we worked with through that sponsored our events and stuff would ask, who's doing this, who's doing that, and I'm like, we are. And so we built a pretty good client list in the Western industry world for doing different marketing aspects. And then that's how I kind of seeped my way into starting to take pictures for some of the ads or the companies. And then finally separated myself enough to where I could hang that shingle out full time and say, here, this is what I'm doing now. And I think with all that, not to be verbose, but with all that, I think all of those, in the mention of all those different people that I came across during that time, from the time I was 19 to then, that happened it was 8/8/08 that I got kicked. That's when that happened. And I was able to rely or hit my Rolodex up. Mm-hmm. And tell people, hey, I'm taking pictures now, and this is what I'm doing, and I had a great reception from it. So it was one of those things that I was able to start working immediately, where I could actually support us on a photographer salary, and then also I do graphic design and stuff like that. So when I very first started, I was kind of mixing it all together, and
just hustling. Yeah,
finally kind of pushed it out to where I just did that, singly there for a while. So,
man, what a crazy story! I'd found the Discovery Channel show. That's like the only success I had in all my research is I saw you in that box next to a lion. And I thought,
don't bore yourself with my bad acting on soap operas, because I'm not a good actor.
Oh man, what a wild story! And I think the thing you said about the network and being able to call on that network, I get a lot of calls from people all the time asking about, well, how do you get in the conservation world, or how do you do this and that, and every time for me, the answer is the network. And it takes years and years and years to build that up. So it's no surprise that was such a big part of your success, because, when you look at everything you've done, your work is associated with so many of these iconic brands that I've just got so much respect for. And I just figured, again, my lack of research, but I just figured you'd been deep in that world from the photography side of things since the 90s. And the fact that '08 is when it really started.
Yeah. I mean, I had, but I had been on different, I think, the guy that works at the corporation that started as the janitor and then worked his way up to the CEO, that's kind of I feel like I've got a breadth of time here, and there's a lot that was left out in between just because of our time constraints.
Yeah, understood. Yeah.
Big on talking about it a lot. And that's why I don't put it out there like, hey, I used to, be a Versace model or what, that's not me. So, like I said, I don't over identify with that. Mm-hmm. So I just feel like it's not that I'm trying to hide it. It's not that I'm trying to exploit it or anything else. It's just the fact that that's just something that happened that got me to where I am today. So it's not really a leg for me to stand on, but I do feel like it's a piece of that thread that makes that rope that makes it ever binding, that it's not going to break, because that shaped me into who I am. And then how I approach my work, as a photographer or in the marketing industry and the creative industry and, whatever it is that I'm doing, it kind of set the tone for a good way to do things. Cause like I said, I was surrounded by the best. So it gave me a very clear, concise view of how to do that in some respect. Mm-hmm. I mean, you take a little bit from everybody, you have to take a little bit from each person. So, and I think that's what I did, whether that was subconsciously or not. Like, I feel like I bring a lot of those elements into the companies that I work with now, just from the mere fact of like, not like I said, not thinking about it or not putting it into voice, but like it just happens. That's just gut, I guess. So.
Yeah. I think the analogy you used about starting at the bottom of a business and then kind of working a bunch of different jobs within the business as you work your way up. And then that business better than anybody, and you can identify with people on all different sides of it. Yeah. I mean, that makes a lot of sense to me. So back to the question I kind of previewed earlier, when I see your work, it's obviously so artistic and it's so uniquely you. Like, I mean, when I see one of your photos, I know it's yours. No matter where it ends up, I know that it's yours. And so you've got this, I don't know what you would call it, a voice, not a voice may not be the right term, but you've got your identity as an artist, but then you've got this other identity that's a damn tough business that you're in. And it's not, and like you said, there are more and more people who think that they're photographers every day because of technology. So can you talk a little bit about kind of maybe some of the keys to your success running a business? The photography speaks for itself in a lot of ways, but what would you say were some of the biggest steps you took to establish yourself and your company as a business and not just an outlet for an artist? Because like on your website, for example, it's very clear. You say, I tell stories for brands.
Right.
And whereas I think there may be some people that are kind of self-indulgent or not, I mean, I don't mean that in a bad way, but they're interested in expressing themselves artistically. So like, was that a conscious decision on your part to like, I'm going to go to brands and I'm going to help them tell a story that they can't tell on their own. And that's what I'm going to bring. Or was there some other way you approached it?
I think it's more of a wellspring of like coming from the inside out. And so I'm just putting out what I think, like I'm trying to put this into thought here. Subjectively, I think great imagery creates emotion. Mm-hmm. So if I take an image and that image is not going to convey a myriad of thought or emotion from the person that's looking at it, then I'm not doing the job that I was set out to do.
Yep.
Because I write. I don't write. I'm not a writer, but I think if I can convey one image to somebody for a brand, that's what they're going to take away. That's what they're going to remember. Mm-hmm. I mean, like I say, I think it goes back to the iconic photographers and the icons that I had been around prior. Because that was like, I mean, I can remember ads from, back then, like even before I was in that industry or working in that industry. I mean, I can remember like the covers of the Cabela's catalogs or, Max Prairie Wings or, things like that. There are things that you gravitate towards as an individual and I don't know if it's the color, I don't know if it's the subject, I don't know what it is or what makes that up. But for me, I want to see the gravitas of visual stories through images, and visual stories, meaning that like you don't even have to put anything. Like that image can tell a huge story. So for me, when I'm thinking of shooting something, and especially if it's for a company, like working internally at some companies and actually, doing that full time, like as a creative director or whatever, like I wanted to see images that were inspirational and aspirational. You don't need to reinvent the wheel on marketing. You don't need to go any further than some of the greats like Leo Burnett and creating the Marlboro campaigns or Coke or, the things that are iconic to today, even like with how Yeti's kind of turned the business on its side. I mean, they were a real disruptor with being able to tell other people's stories. Mm-hmm. But I think that, if you can create images or image that any viewer can lose themselves in for that brief moment in time, whether it's they're seeing it walking down or driving down the street and there's a big, billboard, or if they're looking at a catalog or zine or a lookbook or something on their way to work and they're on the subway or they're on their train or on the boat ferry headed toward their work, they get to lose. They're not the CPA that they're getting ready to go be for 8 to 9 hours for that day. They get to lose themselves in Alaska or, big wave surfing or the outdoors or that hunting trip that they are about to take. I mean, they get to hook themselves into that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. I mean, I think that speaks especially to your specific type of art, because you're showcasing these landscapes and these people that, people in New York or wherever, I mean, or any city, it really is these iconic kind of images that people have dreams about, and the fact that you're out there kind of taking those people and bringing them in front of the people that want to see it. It's really amazing. I mean, like I said, I mean, your work is so unique. One question, obviously I follow you on Instagram, and I've noticed you do a good amount of, portraits of Native Americans. And then I read somewhere that you've got a connection with Native American heritage. And so how did that come into both your life and your artistic life?
Well, I mean, I always grew up, with family stories of like, you're Cherokee on this side, and everybody laughs when you say, around here anyway, that a lot of the Crow or something, if you say Cherokee around here, because everybody goes, oh, everybody's Cherokee. But I mean, we actually are. So through both my mom and my dad's side, there's stories, of, you hear about it. And then we just, not too long ago, a couple of years ago, somebody did our family tree. So on my dad's side, I think it's my fourth great grandfather was a Catawba killer. His name's Thomas Glass. And so he's the one that signed the treaty in Oklahoma after the Trail of Tears. And then he ended up going back to North Carolina. And then on my dad's side as well, and this is my Elizabeth Warren story, is that we are a direct straight line to Pocahontas. So it was interesting in that all the different things that he found, but like I didn't know the Pocahontas part. I knew somewhat about the Thomas Glass part, but now you can put like faces to names and stuff like that. And then on my mom's side, supposedly I think it'd be my fourth or fifth great grandmother was adopted by a white family. So she took on a white name. Cause remember back then it wasn't, I don't know how to put it, but you didn't talk about certain things like that. And so I'm very respectful of that part because I hold it to a high regard, but I also do my Scottish heritage as well and my Irish heritage. I mean, I don't, like I say, I don't try to over-identify with any of them,
sure,
but I just feel like I have a good relationship with that part in me to where I'm not trying to do the always wearing, feathers or anything else. I mean, I try to implement those people and those scenarios into today. Because that's who I know. I mean, I've got a lot of friends that are either Crow or Cheyenne or whatever, and it's no different. I don't see it any different than anything else, but I do the history. I love hearing their stories. I love hearing their parents' stories or grandparents' stories or anything like that. Like it's very interesting to me like I say, I just have an affinity for things of old.
Yeah.
And so I think that helps me identify more with that as a part of, those smaller bricks of how that made me up. Because if you take those bricks out, I wouldn't be here.
Mm-hmm.
But, however far they are away, but I still feel a deep connection to them. So,
yeah, that's really cool. Are there any books, or resources that you found that have helped you, maybe understand some of the Native American groups out in your area, like Crow? I mean, how have you kind of educated yourself on that beyond, having friends?
Well, growing up in Tennessee, I mean, we were right on that North Carolina border, and there's always stuff around, like all around the area where I grew up. There's, Cherokee history. Like you've got the placards that are like, this is where this happened. This is where this happened. So that's all in that area right there. Anywhere from like that Ellijay, Georgia area where I've got Panthertown, they call it Panthertown, North Carolina, which is in Cherokee County, and then all around that area. And, I was, as a small child, I was obsessed. Like, I mean, I carried around this one book. It's sitting over at our guest cabin right now, and I carried that book around with me like religiously every day. So I was there again. I'm getting back into immersion, but I immersed myself in that. So to answer your question, getting out here, when my grandmother and my dad, my mom and I came out here, we went to Lame Deer, which is on the Cheyenne Reservation. Over July the 4th, we went to one of the powwows there because my grandmother wanted to see it too, and we, were all interested. So we went to Lame Deer to that powwow, and then I ended up coming back for Crow Fair. Mm-hmm. That same year. And so being as close as I am, I mean, I drive over to Crow all the time, and there again, just immersed myself in that culture somewhat and being around them and talking to them. And then I made friends with some and mainly the Three Irons family. And it just kind of, blossomed from there. But I mean, like I say, I think, when things are meant to happen, they're meant to happen. And so it was a real education for me in that regard, because I'm getting to hear all these really cool stories and hear about their ancestors. And, it's all stuff that you can put a name to a face to, which is kind of even better than that. Yeah. And some of their family members have written books and things of that nature. So I've read those and it's just kind of, like I say, kind of another piece to that puzzle that I keep talking about where I've been, but also, where we're going. So.
Yeah. No, that makes perfect sense. Have you ever read a book called 13 Moons by Charles Frazier? It's the guy who wrote Cold Mountain, the novel. Have you ever heard of this guy?
No, I've seen Cold Mountain, but I haven't.
I had never heard of this thing, and my buddy told me I need to read it, and I have a hard time staying focused on fiction. And it's about this little boy who is orphaned, and he lives in North Carolina mountains, and he goes up into the mountains on his own and ends up being adopted by a Cherokee tribe. It's one of the best things I've ever read. It is so good. And had my head in there thinking about the North Carolina mountains, and then thinking about this conversation with you. I was looking on maps of like the Smokies and everything. And so it really does a great job of digging into the, it's almost like historical fiction in a way, digging into the, Cherokee culture, the landscape there that you and I know both so well. And so it's a cool one. I'll send it to you. You'll love it. If in all your free time, you can read it.
Yeah. My son, he's like, I think he's at that point now because his hair is down to his elbows. I mean, he lives it every day. He may be the little white boy on the res when he goes over there to visit, but he is, that's one place that they know that he's a boy, because when they braid his hair in the Crow braids, where the men have like on their scalp lock, they do a braid off of there, and then they do two braids down the side, and the gals get a hold of him there and braid his hair. And they know that, he walks around there like he's the cock of the walk, because he's the, he knows they know he's a boy, and he's a man, he's a warrior. So, that's the way he kind of takes his life on. So, but he'll be interested in reading that book. So
it's unbelievably good, man. I actually had dreams about it last night. It's one of these things that really gets in your head, and I'd never heard of it, completely unexpected. And people who listen to this know that I have a hard time with fiction, and I mean, I can't put it down. So you'll love it, and hopefully your boy will too, because it's a really good one.
There's some some of the ones that I started reading when I got here were, however, it's rooted in stories that were passed down to Mary. But Mary Sandoz wrote one on Crazy Horse, which is a great book to read. And then also there's a guy named Charles Eastman who wrote quite a few books on his life, and I think he was half Lakota and half white, and he's got some pretty cool stories because it's from further back. But I like all of his books as well. So
nice. Well, I'll have notes to those and links on the webpage. And just for me personally, I appreciate it because I made a deal with myself that 2021 I'm going to spend more time really digging into a lot of that history, because I've done a good job with it, and I know a lot more than I did, but there's so much more to learn, and I'm getting extremely curious about it, and also feel like, I dig so deep into so many of these different topics in history, and that deserves a massive chunk of my attention. So I might be reaching out again to get more questions for you. One more, we're coming up on an hour, which is wild. One more kind of question just about your career, and then we can start wrapping it up. I mean, where do you see your career going from here? I mean, because it seems like it's just, I knew that you had a varied career and a bunch of varied experiences before we even started talking. And now, I mean, you exceeded what I was expecting by about 10 times. And so, I mean, are you content doing what you're doing now? Telling these stories visually? Do you see where would you, if you had to guess, where would you think things are going 20 years from now? Or do you not even worry about that?
I don't know. Of course, I worry about it because I'm like, I have a family.
You got
now,
a family, yeah, I know that.
Along like I used to be, but, and I wouldn't say worry. I mean, I'm concerned, but at the same time, I feel like I'm interested to see what lies ahead. I think from the business standpoint, like, I was at Filson as the creative director there for almost 2 years, and felt like that was a good breadth of another piece to add, another thread to add to that rope, like we talked about, because it kind of gave me a better view of working, in a corporate environment and from a different perspective of, rather than just being just a photographer, mm-hmm. which, in its own right is a full-time job. But I think that really lent itself to opening my eyes to a lot of things. So I've been talking to some companies about possibly doing that for them. Of course, that would require relocating and all of those kind of things. And I think as of right now, I mean, I'm busy enough to where, after leaving Filson, I can now shoot for different companies. And so I'm at the point to where I'm happy where we are and what we're doing. But to be honest, Ed, I mean, I don't know. I could get a wild hair and drop all this tomorrow and start doing, home design or something totally different. I don't know. Well,
you're talking to a guy who, I guess 13 years ago was 100% focused on being a real estate developer. And now I'm working conservation. I have a podcast. So who the hell knows? I got a few quick questions I like to run through with people. Can we do a few of those and then I'll let you get back to it?
Yes,
we already mentioned some good Native American books. Do you have any other books that have been impactful to you? And they don't have to be about the West, just any good books that come to mind that you recommend to others.
Yeah. I mean, like I say, immersing myself when I got here to Montana, I read a lot of like Rick Bass's and E. Donald Thomas. I don't know if you've heard of E. Donald Thomas, but he's a traditional bow hunter. I think there was a book, one of my favorites was like Longbow Country. And then Rick wrote great books like The 9 Mile Wolves and The Lost Grizzlies, Winter. There's a book he wrote called The Book of Yak, which Yak's a town in northwest Montana where he lives or lived. Rick as an author is awesome, and being able to paint a real picture with his words, kind of like an assimilation of what I'm talking about, trying to paint a picture with a visual image, like a photograph.
Yep.
You can kind of, but he's, I mean, if I could write, I'd want to write like him. Of course, I like all like Cormac McCarthy books. Cormac, I believe he's from Knoxville too, but like all the Pretty Horses and stuff like that. And then some of my favorite books, though, are like The Soul of the Wolf, I think by Michael Fox. And that is more so about, I mean, you could use that. It's kind of one of those like Zen in the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance or something like that.
Yeah. I know that book.
You're learning about motorcycle maintenance, but there's a underlying story. So that's what I like about Soul of the Wolf, is because I think that they can teach us a lot about ourselves, and I kind of, that's what I like a lot about living here where I live. I mean, our neighbors there's a herd of 500 elk. There's grizzly bears right outside the door. There's wolves. We had 14 wolves that used to live right on the ranch across from us. There's mountain lions. I mean, it makes the mountains a little taller when you walk outside and you realize there's stuff out there that can eat you. But it lends itself to just having an authentic connection to just the outdoors. I mean, I think that's part of the reason why I think, we are where we are right now, just because of that fact. I mean, I feel like I get a good lay of the land in my mind of how I interpret things via, like I said, the authors that I just mentioned, and then plus being able to visually look out the window here at the office and see the mountains and rivers and animals and horses and all that kind of stuff. I mean, those kind of things, provide those anchors now for me as well. So.
Yeah, it gives you humility. I mean, and that's the thing I was just thinking about through this whole conversation is the term that keeps coming to mind about you is you're curious and you're very humble. And I think that's a pretty damn good combination. That you can't get in much trouble if you got that combo. And I think that speaks to, how you've been able to establish relationships with all these different people, both in business and then your subjects when you're photographing them. These cowboys are not the most open books. And so I think that humility and curiosity that's a killer combo. Last kind of big question. Mm-hmm. So all the experiences you've had, varied experience in the entertainment industry, in the art world, in the ranching world and rodeo. I mean, you've done all this cool stuff. Do you have any kind of parting words of wisdom for the people that listen to this podcast? That's hard when you ask a humble guy that.
I don't want to seem like a know-it-all.
See? I'm asking you though.
Well, there's an old saying, people teach what they most need to learn. So, and this just comes to mind. It's just funny, but I would say, and I'll put it into family ear terms, but never miss a good opportunity to keep your mouth shut. But they say a different ending on it. God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth, kind of thing. So, yeah, I mean, I just try to ingest and, like I said, everything around, and I don't know how to say it. I just keep it simple. I mean, that would be if I had advice for anybody, I would just say keep it simple. I think sometimes, in today's day and age, I mean, there's so many different things we're bombarded with, whether it's our phones or our, social media platforms, or which are all great. They're all, you can look on them as a necessary evil or the best thing since ice cream. But I think going back to the basics and keeping things simple, I guess that would be the best one without being snarky on keep your mouth shut.
I like both of those. I think both of those are very, very timely for where we find ourselves today. So, man, I really appreciate this. This was really fun. And like I said, I've been admiring your work for so long. And so it's really good to get to chat and also chat with somebody with a Southern accent for once. So thank you very much.
Hey, thank you. I appreciate you, thinking of me and having me on, and appreciate your time too.
Hey, it's Ed again. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast. I know your time is valuable, so it means the world that you spend it listening. If you want to support the podcast and help it to continue to spread and grow, there are a few ways you can help. Number 1, pass it along to a friend or share it on social media. Word of mouth recommendations are the most powerful way for ideas to spread, so I'd love it if you could share the podcast with a few pals who might enjoy it. Number 2, you can go to Apple Podcasts and give it a 5-star review. Good reviews encourage the Apple overlords to suggest the podcast to others. So there's a link in the notes if you'd be so kind as to give it 5 stars. Number 3, you can support the podcast financially via Patreon, and there are exclusive benefits for those who do, including a monthly behind-the-scenes newsletter, Mountain and Prairie stickers, live and recorded video chats with podcast guests, and much more. Number 4, I've also got 2 emails that I send out. The first is my weekly email called Good News from the American West, which I send out every Wednesday. It's only positive news, something we can all use a little more of these days. And my other email is my bi-monthly book recommendations email. One email every other month with 5, 6, 7, or 8 books that I've recently read and highly recommend. The thousands of people on both of these lists will vouch for me. No spam or other funny business. And number 5, finally, check out my online store for Mountain and Prairie stickers, shirts, and coffee mugs. I've got some really cool designs from Western artists with more on the way. So head to mountainandprairie.com/shop to check it all out. I'd love to connect with you. I'm on Instagram and LinkedIn, so look me up on either of those platforms by my name or through the links on my website. All right, that's it. Thanks so much for your support.